What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon. The two of them were really exceptional revolutionary thinkers, and a lot of people today are actually asking us to kind of reevaluate the ideas about who the Vilna Gaon was. So, for example, there's a book that was recently published by an Elio Stern with a very attractive cover.
Oh, wow.
With a picture of the Vilna Gaon that looks like he's very spiffy. I don't know that he actually would dress like that. But one of the arguments that Elio Stern in this book, The Genius, makes is that that contrary to people's understanding that the Vilna Gaon was simply a defender of the old school,
Wow.
that he actually was a revolutionary thinker in his own right, and that ultimately his ideas prevailed to some extent over those of Hasidus. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
But he is mostly known vis-a-vis the Baal Shem Tov as the Misnagid, the great antagonist to Hasidus in general. The Baal Shem Tov, in a sense, was just the founder of Hasidus. He wasn't the actual person who popularized Hasidus. That happened later. The movement of Hasidus happened in perhaps 20 years or so after his passing, and more so after that, when people like the Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk and Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Ladi, known as the Alter Rebbe of Chabad, the Melech of Lezhensk, the person who brought Hasidus to Poland, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. When these types of kind of the third generation of Hasidic rabbis, the people who had studied mostly under the Maggid of Mizrich, they started their own communities of Hasidim. And that's when Hasidism essentially exploded. It became not yet dominant, but threatening to the establishment, the rabbinic establishment, the kehila, so to speak, the communal structure with its hierarchy, with its rabbis, with its shochtim, slaughterers, who were. And at the same time that there was this challenge within, internally, there's also a lot going on with emancipation in Western Europe, in Germany, France. But this, in Eastern Europe, there's still, it's more of a backwater in terms of the revolution hasn't yet, the intellectual climate hasn't yet quite caught up to the humanism and libertarianism and all the isms that are raging in other parts of Europe. So, but it will. But for whatever reason, the Gaon of Vilna was more threatened by Hasidim than by Mendelssohn. Because Mendelssohn was like in a different zone. It wasn't his problem. He never once condemned publicly Mendelssohn. That was like of significance that anybody can find in writing. Or another famous maskil, a free thinker, Naphtali Hertz Wesley, who never knew about these people, was familiar with their work. Later on, people would say that he was not happy, etc. But that not that we really can notably see visible in his lifetime. So let's now there's one simple way of understanding the Vilna Gaon's kind of resentment of Hasidus, and that is to see the threat of this new movement as being not just a alternative to the power structure that threatened the stability of the community, but a shift in ideology and belief that was not only wrong, that was dangerously close, and perhaps was influenced by the followers of Shabtai Tzvi, false messiah, who had died just barely 100 years earlier. And we'll see that the Vilna Gaon mistook or was mistakenly confused stories about the followers, Sabbatinian followers, with Hasidic followers. That was either because he lacked the expertise in identifying who was really part of this nascent movement in the early years. Later on, we find that his understanding of the movement developed as more of their works were printed, published, and he was able to have access to them. So before I kind of show you what he resented and was opposed to, I first want to show you what the foundations of Hasidus really are. There's a beautiful chapter that I would like to kind of riff off a little bit, sometimes in admiration, other times in slight disagreement, with a book by Emanuel Etkes called The Baal Shem Tov. It has a beautiful cover. I just took off the cover because I didn't want it to get ruined. Baal Shem, the best magician, mystic, and leader. It's a great book. Anyway, in this book, the chapter that I felt was the most helpful to understanding the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov is a chapter called The Best as Mystic and Pioneer in Divine Worship. That's the chapter. The chapter is so coherent that you can almost use it as a guide to entering into the mystical life. That's how the point behind the chapter is that rather than see the various kind of teachings of the Baal Shem Tov as different ideas or experiences, because Baal Shem Tov is more experiential than, let's say, the Vilna Gaon. He's more of a person who experienced divine revelation of sorts, but that there's a coherent whole to the nature of his revelations, his descriptions of them that turn into a way of being, even if they don't start out as a philosophy per se, even if they're more of a way of experiencing God, they're still, they're maybe subsequent, like he's not sure whether the experience came first, perhaps the ideas that link up these experiences are the after effect of after I felt what I felt, how do I then explain it? Okay? So in other words, the Baal Shem Tov had a variety of spiritual experiences that he then kind of unpacked in a way that other people could understand to some degree and get, and perhaps try to emulate and get a similar type of experience out of the structure that he then created for understanding these experiences. But I don't necessarily agree with all of Etkis's conclusions. As I don't agree with some of Moshe Edel's understanding of the Baal Shem Tov, of his kind of development. But I'll try to explain what's going on. What Etkis does is he brings a number of theories and analyzes the theories and rejects each one, or partial rejection, and then he comes up with his own, ranging from, you have a person like the Baal Shem Tov. The question is, where is the Baal Shem Tov somebody who read different works, as perhaps he was inspired by the Shul, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit? I'm somewhat familiar with, having studied a number of his selections. It's a lengthy treatise, a number of volumes, different areas, but it's like a precursor to Hasidus. Hasidism could be seen as perhaps a medley of teachings from the Shalah, the Maharal, the Ari, the Ramak, the Zohar, and other rabbinic teachings as well. So there are some people in varying degrees who want to point specifically to source material where the Baal Shem Tov got his ideas from, as if to say he's not really an original thinker as much as he is a decider of existing ideas that he wants to focus on. The history of ideas when it comes to religious personalities that are innovative and create movements could be argued to be one of redefining what's already there. By the way, within the Hasidic world also there's this dynamic where many people say, it's not just the academic question. The Baal Shem Tov was a new light. Same Torah, invigoration of what's already there. In other words, if I'm in a dark room and I don't see what's going on, or if I'm depressed, so I don't value and cherish what's happening around me, and then somebody turns the light on, and I see, wow. Or somebody gives me Prozac, or whatever it is that lifts the sadness. That's the Baal Shem Tov. It's not that the Baal Shem Tov taught a Torah that wasn't inexistent, but it was made everything new. That's one way of saying the Baal Shem Tov. Or, simply put, the Baal Shem Tov experienced what other people only understood as an idea. In other words, the realization of spiritual truths not as a belief system, not as a learned intellectual pursuit, but rather as a mystical, direct experience. But the question is, well, aren't there many mystics that are feeling what they're reading? And the answer could be yes, perhaps, but they didn't start a movement. So these are all kind of questions that I'm addressing, many of them addressed by Etkis bringing in earlier thinkers, such as Gershon Sholem, Weiss, who he brings down as well, Mendel Picars, others who kind of analyze what was it that the Baal Shem Tov actually created or didn't create. So, in order for me to really review the chapter, I'm not going to. I'll have you do that on your own. There's a lot that I like about the structure of this idea of seeing the bigger picture. Let's talk about a bunch of the things, this bigger picture. I like the premise, which I agree with. In fact, it may sound a little arrogant, because I think he went further than I would have done. But what I agree with, I already understood intuitively that the Baal Shem Tov had a mahalach, had a perspective of a conglomeration of ideas that were interconnected. I didn't understand them as just one idea here and one idea there that will never meet. But he lays it out beautifully. So I will say that he lays it out. Although in the details, I don't necessarily agree with him, but in the overall way he sees it, I have a lot in common. So let's talk a little bit about the Baal Shem Tov's way. One of the things about the Baal Shem Tov is his rethinking about the nature of evil. So that in Luriana Kabbalah, in the Zohar very much, evil is a thing in and of itself. So much so, a friend of mine is working on his PhD on Nathaniel Berman. I've had the privilege of studying with him as a chavrusa for many years. And his PhD, I mean, he has many PhDs. This is one of his PhDs. He's a law professor, but he's getting a PhD in Jewish studies. And it's on understanding evil in the Kabbalah. And so he's turned me on to a variety of these ideas. But evil is an independent entity in works such as the Zohar.